Thinking of investing, working, or starting a business in the cannabis industry? We've got you covered right here on Plant Problems. Hosted by Tony Frishknecht, Plant Problems takes a different approach to cannabis than what you're seeing and hearing from the mainstream media. Come along with Tony and be in the know about how to invest, work, or start a cannabis business. Let's get the show started with your host, Tony Frishknecht.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Plant Problems. This is your host, Tony Frishknecht, and I have an awesome guest today. He is a very close friend of mine. I've had a few of these on recently, but he also is coming from decades of experience as well in the cannabis industry. So please let me welcome Conal Rosanbalm from Kind Love Dispensaries out of Denver, Colorado. Conal, how you doing today?
Doing very well. Thank you, Tony. How's it going with you?
Fantastic, man. Thanks for taking some time out of your day and sharing some unique things that are happening in the industry. Conal, he's actually worked for me in the past, over a decade ago now. We brought him on to run one of our dispensaries. So I've got a very close business working relationship with Conal, and he's kind of built himself into what I would call kind of a wholesale giant at this point. He is doing wholesale work for Kind Love. He's always into the quality side of it. He's always moving through new avenues. He's been through the ups and downs of what wholesale pricing is. And I think this is going to be extremely helpful for you guys that are in the industry right now in Colorado, because sometimes you can't tell exactly what's happening. You can tell what's happening in your store, but it's hard to really get a gauge on what everybody else is doing. And so I brought Conal in here to share what everybody else is kind of looking at and what they're doing. Conal may share some names, he may not, but he'll give you a good overview of what's happening in the market today. We are in a time period right now that is also entering the coronavirus situation. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. But without further ado, Conal, I would like to let you share a little bit about your background with everyone, and we can go from there, okay?
Absolutely, sure. So, yeah, you got the name right, Conal Rosanbalm. And you got it correct as well. I'm working at Kind Love Dispensary now. I'm the wholesale manager there. So most of my time is spent at the grow, in and around the growers, all the trimmers, the trim people, as well as the rest of the sales team, the fulfillment team, and then our ownership group, including my direct manager, which is the owner's son. So that's most of my time. Some of my time, I suppose, is spent at the store as well, looking at what product they've gotten from our grow that I didn't maybe get to see if I didn't get allotted that wholesale. I'm in store checking out the quality, and then what end consumers that purchase from our namesake think of the product as well, which is huge.
So to give people a better idea on the amount of volume you guys are producing, what kind of wholesale are you required to move on a monthly basis as a wholesale rep?
Sure. So monthly, our revenue goal in output as far as wholesale goes, and that does not include the retail side of the business, is $300,000 per month out the door of finished product, all past testing, etc., and made its way into the marketplace. So revenue is considered anything that's been invoiced, even if it's prior to shipment. So sometimes you'll invoice something before the end of the month, but still whatever's sold within a 30-day, 31-day period needs to equal or be greater than $300,000.
So your job is to move several hundred pounds a month of flower throughout the Colorado, correct?
That's correct. And it's not just flower. Obviously, there's a lot of byproducts when it comes to cannabis in general. So when they're producing the product, it's my job to sell everything that comes off of it as well. So it's flour, it's trim, it's popcorn nugs, or what we consider shake, pebbles, depending on the size and the quality of those specific products, and then fresh frozen as well, which is a really cool avenue because that tends to be, so if you're selling a pound of weed for, let's just say it's $2,000, fresh frozen ends up being about a fifth of the price, but you end up selling more of the weight because of the wetness of it.
So with the fresh frozen, can you explain what kind of products that you can use in the fresh frozen and who's actually using this product? And, it may be a new concept to a lot of people out there. I know it's been happening for a while in some of the more developed states, but yeah, so would you share some of that with us?
Definitely. So fresh frozen, basically, if you picture the process of getting to a cured flower that you're going to sell in a dispensary or something, you basically completely cut that entire process out for fresh frozen. So what you're doing is you're cutting the plant down, stripping it of some of the larger like fan leaves and that kind of thing. And then instantly, while it's still wet, hasn't been hung to dry or any kind of curing process whatsoever, no trimming really, it gets put into bags, vacuum seal bags, and then instantly stuck into a cryo basically like a cold freezer, not just like a normal freezer at home, so that it can get to temperature quicker and that doesn't damage the product. But basically, it's just frozen product, and then we sell it to what's called a MIP here, or an infused product manufacturer. And it's typically what's called as solventless processing, but usually they'll make it into things like a live resin or batter or rosin and that kind of thing.
So just so you guys don't get too out there, I mean, some of these terms are pretty specific. When he's talking about freezing this product and creating it for a lot of these other processors that are taking this and putting it into many other products. He just named a couple of them, just a few of them, but don't think about this too much because we don't want to make it too technical for you guys. But there's several things you can use the fresh freeze for. But there's also some huge gains that you get out of this is the actual processing of this plant for the grower. So for your guys' facility, I mean, how much time is saved with the fresh freeze?
It's huge. So the curing through the trimming process obviously takes, depending on, there's a lot of variables, obviously, but usually it's at least 6 weeks worth of letting the plant process into where it needs to get in order to be sellable. And then there's the testing part of it all. So you got to get potency testing. There's a bunch of them, microbial, now there's heavy metals, etc. That's Colorado. But for the fresh freeze, all you really need to do is cut it down, freeze it, and it's available to sell practically the next day.
So your labor is next to nothing, right?
I mean, it's almost zero. The grow side of it is the same, but yeah, it completely removes the trimming aspect of it, and it can all be done in one day. So sometimes it's great for me because let's just say we're waiting for a bunch of potency testing or microbial testing to come back, and maybe I wouldn't have anything to sell that week. They can decide to take a room down and give me, 5 or 6 tables, which is sometimes 20 or 30 plants, which can be a large amount of fresh frozen weight that I can sell, anywhere from $200 to $280 per pound.
So it's much less.
Correct.
But when it comes down to it, the labor that it's saved is
huge.
Is like half the expense in growing this plant.
I'd say at least, yeah.
So what is the market like for fresh frozen then? Because I think it's a very good niche for a lot of those guys that are wondering, especially what you just mentioned there, like how you can just gain access and sell something very quickly and not have to worry about cure and everything else. What have you seen the market? Do you have a lot? I mean, is there a large number of guys like, we just want fresh frozen, we don't want anything else?
Absolutely. In fact, those people I think have probably built their business on just needing that kind of product. And it might be worth mentioning the difference in processing dry product and fresh frozen as well, because the products that come from those two different ends are also completely different. So these people that are really interested in the fresh frozen don't like using things like propane or butane in their processing.
In their extraction process,
correct.
Right?
It's a completely different process and it's a completely different end material. So it's not shatter or wax. It's things like live resin, like I said earlier. So those people are very specific with what they want. And the handful of customers that come to me most often typically will buy me out, before I even show anybody else the inventory, as long as they've got the capacity to put it in their freezers and, you know what I mean? And it works with their processes. So
yeah.
It's very specific though.
So it's a specific end user, but yet you have no problem selling it quickly.
Correct. There's a lot of it also where the price to the end consumer, the person that's going to buy it and take it home and eventually vape that or whatever, has gotten pretty low. So the need for higher volumes of the product in the marketplace is there as well. So people need to process more to make what they would have made a while back with less product because the end consumer is paying less. So I need to grow more. They don't want to pay quite as much, but they'll still pay some. So it's finding that sort of happy medium,
which most owners are out there trying to figure out at this time, right? So if you guys are looking for some way to free it up, you might look into the process. I'm not sure how expensive it is to do the freeze part. Maybe you can speak more to that, but I haven't done it before, so I'm not exactly familiar with what it takes to fresh freeze something. If it's, I think they do it in... I imagine they do it with seafood and a bunch of different products that we already use now or consume now.
I think the important part about freezing it quickly, which is why I called it a cryo earlier and not just a regular freezer, is that you're right. It's like seafood. If you freeze it more quickly, then typically a lot of the flavors are going to be saved. Whereas if it takes a day or two for it to get completely solid, it's going to ruin a lot of the things that are in there that create the flavor, like the terpenes. It'll also ruin some of the THC content, which is still there when you process everything. So yeah, it's extremely important. And I don't think it's that much more expensive. It's just about getting the right cryo freezer, right? And then as long as you can afford the electric bill.
Cryo sounds expensive, right?
Bing,
When
bang,
you say
boom.
it like that.
It does. Well, isn't that like how people are freezing their heads and stuff too? Right?
I think so.
Yeah, Walt Disney's out there going, I told you.
So, aside from the fresh freeze, you've seen the market in its ups and its downs. And right now it seems like it's kind of leveling off a little bit. Just so that people can understand where we were back in 2010. 2010 was kind of our banner year of dispensaries really taking hold around Colorado. And so our market was far different than it is today. What kind of background do you have in that time period? What did you see that really stood out to you?
So I've thought about this a lot, especially lately, because there are so many different factors in determining all kinds of things, like what the need is like, what the price is going to be set at, how much am I involved in the statewide pricing and that kind of thing, knowing we've got a great product. Back in the day, in 2010 or so, right when I was first starting, it was so different because there was no statewide tracking system, right, which is what we call metric now, was once MITS. That wasn't around, so we couldn't obviously guarantee that the product that we were purchasing for the store, when I was managing the store, was even from Colorado. How could you could never guarantee that. So we called it the Wild West back then, right? Literally, a guy could walk into the store with a suitcase, right, full of half pounds or quarter pounds or whatever. We'd be like, is it from Colorado? Because it needed to be still. It was supposed to be. He'd say yes. And we're like, okay, sounds good. Open up your case. And he'd open it up on the table there. And me and the other bud tenders would be like, well, that looks pretty good. What's this one? The Golden Goat? Cool. How much you got of that? Okay, this is the Sour Diesel. Awesome. You got some blueberry here? Let's just get us up to 2 pounds. And we pick like a quarter pound of each. We'd end up paying somewhere around $3,000 a pound, I think, back right when I first started. And that stayed about the same level for a couple of years before a whole bunch more people sort of jumped in the game. But one thing that I've noticed is very different now that there's a seed to sale tracking system is that those kind of Wild West, outlaw type people that are out on their own are no longer really doing that. It has to come from a viable source.
So how has that affected the black market here in Colorado?
Well, so I think honestly that the black market, ever since the recreational wave sort of hit and everybody realized that they can grow plants on their own as long as they're 21, people are still growing on their own everywhere. They don't want to go to the dispensary and pay a bunch of taxes on stuff. They think they can just do it on their own, which is fine. But I think a lot of people are sort of taking advantage of it and growing far too many plants as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that those guys sell to are the people that don't want to go to the dispensary and buy. So what we'll notice, and sometimes it's monthly, mostly it's like a quarterly or a half a year wave, but there's a massive outdoor growing, I guess, sort of area down outside of Pueblo here in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is if there's an early freeze or if there's a big hailstorm or something like that, a whole bunch of plants in the rec market will get destroyed, right? So for me as a viable salesman, I consider myself a viable salesman. I watch the price of the product that I'm selling tick up a little bit because the need is there, right? And so I'm the one that's supplying the need. In the black market, the same kind of thing happens, but it's usually when there's like a large bust, right? So like if some dude with 50 houses full of weed gets popped and all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of or thousands of pounds are taken, suddenly the black market need is huge, but they need to go buy it somewhere else. So they're coming to dispensaries, and that also drives the price of wholesale up because the demand is there. So there's so many different correlations, across both sides.
So do you see that the legal market is winning at this point?
I'd say so, yeah, because people don't come to Colorado to buy black market weed.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? And that's why people are still 10 years, 11 years after the fact, taking selfies in front of the first dispensary that they ever bought. Flower at or whatever, or hash or edibles or anything really topical, you know what I mean? Because they walked into a dispensary and bought it legally, sort of a thrill to it, I think. Whereas the black market is still kind of like a hand slap, kind of goofy still.
Yeah, it's the good old boys network still a little bit. I mean, some of the biggest growers, I don't know many of them anymore. I knew many guys that anytime you hear of a big bust, like you were just talking about before, you would just not see people anymore. They would just be gone. And that would scare a lot of everybody else. Is kind of like, we're out of here too. And so I've definitely noticed over the last 5 years a lot less of that. I'm sure it's still happening,
mm-hmm.
and they're still shipping to other states. But I wonder what that price point is to really neutralize the black market. Have you thought about that at all?
I haven't really. I have known a couple of sort of smaller scale growers, even recently, where like maybe they had a friend somewhere, maybe that's in another state, asking about what the pricing is in Colorado so they can determine what they wanted to purchase for from the Colorado grower.
Interesting.
And then the Colorado grower was like, well, what's the price that they're paying for it in that other state? Because I'd rather get that price than sell it to them for what a Colorado price is, right? So there's
well, they're gauging. They're basically
Right.
they're gauging whether or not it's worth driving it across state lines or
Right.
not. Right?
100%.
Yeah, that changes. It was going to happen. I just haven't heard it till you told me now that you've seen it, actually heard it happen.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing too, where you know, and just get it out there, I guess. But I mean, like I've known people all over the place, lived all over the country, and that's the kind of thing you got to kind of keep your hands clean, especially for me. Like I said, as a viable salesman, like I don't like to try to get into that side of everything, but you do hear things, you know, sort of through the grapevine.
Yeah, of course.
Because everybody likes cannabis. I mean, that's not completely true, but it seems sure like it is the majority of people at this point. So if you don't have access to it, you're looking for easier access to it, and dispensaries provide that. Period.
So we've had some ups and downs, of course. We had a market really thriving. Seems like 14 and 15 were really good. 16 was a rough year. There was a lot of supply in the 16-17 area time frame. What prices were we looking at back just a couple years ago?
Well, there were so many factors. So 14, 15, the novelty was still very, very real, right? And what they called cannabis tourism was massive, right? So people were like, oh my God, Colorado went legal. And so people were just flocking here. Just do that thing like I just said, just go shop at a dispensary. Even if you just came for one day and you went to one store, people were stoked about it. But when the rec market first opened, remember those days, there were lines all day, every day for months upon months upon months of people trying to just go in and buy rec weed legally because they could. So as the novelty sort of started going away, I guess what happened is people started building their business models off of those max numbers that they could push, right? And so they were making as much weed as they can, thinking that they're going to keep selling that much weed. And then they weren't anymore because people started not traveling as much, you know what I mean? And that kind of thing. Also, another thing that started happening was the state just kept on handing out licenses. So if, let's just say this is a completely arbitrary number, but let's just say it started at 200 growing facilities in the state in 2014, rec, including med and rec. Right now, currently, there are somewhere around 760 and 500 and something storefronts is what I read the other day. All that stuff is on the DOR website too. If you ever want to look up the real numbers, it's kind of cool. But so I think that had something to do with it too. Like once you have all these licenses out and everybody's trying to produce as much product as they can, because the more product you have, you figure the more valuable it is to you. But when it's just totally flooded, everybody kind of has to drop their trousers and take what they can get in order to break even to get to the next cycle, right?
You have to pay bills too, right?
Right, because you got to keep the doors open. You can't just hold your head high and say, I'm not taking anything less than $3,200 because Mike down the street's going to take $800 so he can pay his, so he can pay his bill. So that happened not only with grows and stuff, but with all the other vendors and stuff too. So we started seeing numbers for wholesale prices, even with regular products, right? Like cartridges and edibles and things, sharply drop off as well, just because there were so many people producing it. And I think fewer people buying. But then what happened was the consumer kind of got spoiled. Like I was talking about with the live resin a minute ago. Once you sell somebody a 100 milligram edible for $8, they're never going to want to pay more than $8 again.
Yeah.
That's just a fact, And they will eventually if everybody puts their heads together. But once you've introduced that, now you've got to figure out a way to produce your edibles for $2 so you can sell it to the dispensary for $4 so they can sell it to the consumer for $8. And it becomes nearly impossible.
That's a good point that you bring up because, if you are creating a brand out there and you are in a new market, you got to be aware that these are the type of things that you got to dig yourself out of once you go down fighting price wars. It's hard not to do. Like Conal mentioned, you've got to pay the bills. So how do you keep sales up without dropping your pants to pay the bills? It's a fine line. So hopefully you guys out there that are doing this are prepared to start this or have that a little bit of a sense of that, because when it comes to making that decision, you have to understand how hard it is to dig yourself out of that hole once you're in it.
I would say if there was advice to give, and with just this discussion that we're having, specifically the way that prices go down and tend to stay down, for a lot of the time, if you are building your model, you should build it on the lowest number you think is feasible, and that way you're already ahead of it once everything does reach that point, because you'll be that far ahead of all the other people that didn't and thought they were going to buy the World Trade Center with whatever, that thought they were going to buy the Empire State Building with their profits.
Well, with that said, we've seen $1,000 swings go from 2,000 to 1,000 to 800 per pound.
Yeah.
So if you guys haven't experienced that yet out there, or again, you're in a new market, it will happen. You know, it is going to be different for every market. You know what, speaking of every market out there, what do you think the closest market is to Colorado right now that's closest in contender of how things are working?
With current pricing?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be easy for me to say something like California, wouldn't it? Just kind of price-wise, but they've got so many issues that I don't think that it's really a close comparison. I luckily haven't really had to explore out-of-state cannabis commerce much of late, or ever, in fact.
Well, I actually brought you on mostly to talk about Colorado, but I really wanted to see if you had heard anything or seen anything.
I mean, I've heard about states that have still got pretty incredibly high pricing for like per pound or something. Like, I remember initially when Nevada came on, they were talking about $4,000 a pound, which was already more than I had ever made on a pound selling wholesale when I was over at Locanti's, you know?
Yeah.
It was more than I'd ever bought a pound of flour for when I was working at Open. It was, you know what I mean? That was far more. And so that was kind of crazy to me. And it feels like new states, when they come on, because there is sort of a shortage, tend to have inflated prices. And then when things finally do even out, that's when you start seeing the weaker people drop off and some consolidation. So I don't really know who's closest, though, at this point. Have you seen anything different?
Well, I mean, I've seen, it's tough because we are as developed as anyone is right now. I feel like regulatory wise it's pretty even right now. There's always some battle with taxes and stuff like that between, and
sure,
that's a totally different thing. But for consistency on how we're regulated, I think that's made things calm down. And going to states like California, it's where it's everywhere. It's still the wild, wild west. Way up north, it's very, very wild up there. I mean, they don't really understand why we collect taxes, you know, and it's funny to talk to them, but that's just been their mindset for so long. They're not used to anything else. Before I get to the next question, I just want to stop for a minute. If you guys do have any questions for me about this conversation or any other podcast, please go to plantproblem.com and give me your questions or comments there on this episode or any other, and let me know, and I will be happy to go deeper into this conversation if you want some more information. So Conal, dealing with Colorado and where it's at now, would we have steady pricing right now that's happening in the wholesale market? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, and there are variables still, but most of them are related to, like, I've got some leeway when it comes to people purchasing our product, like based on, I guess, volume, right? So there's going to be a difference in price if you're buying 1 pound from me and if you're buying 20 pounds from me. There's some leeway there. We've also got all the different products that I sort of listed earlier. So there's regular flour, there's trim, there's, popcorn and that. And within those little, I guess you could call them verticals, there's also different things based on quality, right? So some of the flour that will grow, maybe it's a new pheno, or we're trying out a new strain we've never grown that we don't really know what it likes in a room or in nutrients and that kind of thing. So some things will grow a little spindly, maybe a little bit looser. But once we dial it all in, things start looking pretty consistent too, and that's where the consistency comes in.
How many strains are you guys growing right now?
Man, I'd say, including ones that we're trying and that we just released, we're probably growing somewhere around 24 different strains. But that's constantly changing. There's about 12 strains, I'd say. Yeah, 12 strains that we would consider like flagship, and those ones we know really well and we treat really well, and they're very responsive to it, and that's kind of what we consider our cream of the crop. Pun intended. But about 24, I'd say.
Okay, so I remember, when we first started, we were growing like 20 and then 60 and then 80 and 100. I mean, the problems that came with that were unbelievable. What was actually happening? I know that it was a tough road, and you guys have kept it to around 24, which I think is smart. But what keeps you guys, what is the market asking for right now? Are they just happy with quality, or do they want everything on the side of the moon?
It honestly depends on, there's so many factors.
Yeah.
So one of them is time of the year, right? There's a thing that we always experience every year in Colorado called Croptober. So basically that's when a whole lot of the outdoor grows and stuff would typically harvest their crop from outside, and there's a whole huge influx of weight. Whether it's not going to be as good as the product that we've been growing year-round indoor that we harvest weekly, but it definitely affects the market just by volume, right? Another thing that when there's factors are like when there's new trends, like I noticed at the very beginning when I started, things like blueberry and sour diesel and just sort of these old school like OG Kush and that kind of thing, like names that you would have heard of a while back, maybe Trainwreck, were the popular things. That's what people were asking for. And then suddenly 10 years later is almost a new generation, right? Kind of people. So then things like wedding cake, gelato, things that are like dessert taste or like flavored names are becoming popular. Right now we're selling a sunset sherbet strain or something like that. I'm like, oh, it doesn't really have anything to do with weed, but people buy it up, you know?
The name, right?
But now what's happening is people are missing the old strains that we used to have. So people are like, I can't find any blueberry anymore. It's like, well, it's because you bought wedding cake for 3 years, bro. we killed it off. I don't know what to tell you. But that's kind of fun too. And I'm sure people have been keeping some, DJ Short strains in their pocket, to pop again years later. But
so what advice would you have to the listener out there that is wondering, well, what strains do I pick? What kind, how many types do I need? Stuff like that we've already been through.
I think it'd be good to do some market research. One thing that I've always tried to do a good job at is visit other locations. Maybe I don't necessarily, have to buy from every store I walk in, but it's nice to know what people are carrying. And an easy way to get ahead of that without having to go visit 25, 30 stores is go on maybe like a Leafly or a Weed Maps type website where you can read people's menus. And a lot of times they update them either weekly or daily, so you can see what the trends are there. But I do think it's important to keep with the time. So like if something is selling, like if it is a sorbet, whatever, I'd say go for that because that's going to sell instantly. It's also good to remember where this all sort of came from and keep some of those strains in your back pocket if you can. Like if you have the ability to hold some seeds down and keep them in your pocket for 5 or 6 years, just so you can bring out an OG strain in the future, I think that's a really good idea too.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to really the seasonal beers, right, that you see out in the market. Like Christmas comes around or, October comes around and pumpkin come out. So you kind of see that more pop in and out, and then it kind of spikes a little bit of freshness to your brand or your product,
sure,
right?
For sure. And I think that happens maybe more in like the edibles market, right? People are going to come out with seasonal flavors and that kind of thing a lot of the time. I've yet to see it'd be crazy to have like a pumpkin spice cartridge. Like that would be awful. But they did do crazy flavors back in the day. Like weren't you buying like blue raspberry flavored cartridge and stuff?
There were a lot of flavors. Yeah, there were a lot of flavors. I don't know how well if they're around anymore, but
I think people want to taste their weed when they're using their weed.
Well, and when you start digging into that, we start talking about taste and terpenes, right? And,
oh yeah,
and that's pretty big in the cartridge market right now. I mean, you've got a lot of experience with the vaporizer market as well.
Yep.
Conal worked for Open Vape for quite some time. He was their very first sales rep there and went through a lot of different ideas that I think a lot of people are experiencing in new markets now. So if you guys are in new markets, look back at some people that have done it already, and that'll help you kind of understand. You can look at the products they put out over a 2 or 3 year period, because I know we went through a ton of them at that time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's something I really kind of get a kick out of. I'm fortunate enough that I get to meet a lot of people on a day-to-day basis, but just in general through my work and otherwise. But I've gotten a chance to sit down with a lot of different owners of a lot of different shops and product manufacturers, and sometimes even more importantly are managers, right? Because it's part of my job to go find new buyers. It's not going to be the same people all the time. And you meet managers that have been around what we do now. And in Colorado, you have to have a badge, right, to work in the industry. And every badge has a number based on the order in which it was released by the state. And so they just recently capped, and I don't know if you know this, 100,000 badges. So my badge starts with a 1. At first glance, you might think, I just moved here, right? Oh, you just try to get in the industry, wonder where this guy's from, and then you look closer and it's a 10, whatever. It's only a 5-digit number, so it's not in the 100,000. And I've still got my old one that starts with a 0. So you'll start seeing the old managers that have been around for as long as I have. And I'm like, oh, this guy's got a 0 on the front of his too. Like, let's chat. And sometimes you can have an hour-long conversation about the way things used to be without even realizing that you've had that long of a conversation. It's kind of crazy.
Well, I like the idea behind that as well, because for you guys that are looking for seasoned people out there and people that know their shit, could be a good idea to watch out for those lower numbers just on badge numbers, and you'd be able to tell what the person's worth right away in front of you that's sitting down in front of you. What's your badge number? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's 0015. What? You know?
Wow. When can you start?
Well, I'm not saying it's going to be they're going to be great, but at least they've hung in there for several years.
I would hope that 0015 wasn't looking for a job at this point, right?
Yeah, hopefully they figured out a good management position somewhere,
or
executive or something like that.
Exactly.
So, no, that's funny. That's funny. So where do you see things going over the next year with the Colorado market?
So I think that here we go again with it all depends, right? But like, I do think that we reached a point right now where the state, even with the population as inflated as it is, and a lot of that is because of the rec market. I think that's one of the reasons why we're so crowded in Denver now is because the rec market brought a whole bunch of people here. I do think that's planning out a bit, right? So there's not as many people moving here every week that there was 3 years ago or whatever, or even 5 or 6 years ago when it was first starting. So that's good. There are also not as many people out there looking for new licenses. Right now, there's a lot of trade, right, of licenses or like selling of licenses that are already established. There's not that, it's not zero, but there's not as many new licenses being issued as there have been in the past. So people are buying up old ones. There's a lot of consolidation from larger companies. And a lot of the companies that are already established are now making other products that they might not have been making in the past. For example, Kind Love make our own edible right now called Comma, right? Back in the day, if you were your own dispensary, unless you were some major company, like maybe the Green Solution or something, you wouldn't make your own products. You would buy them just wholesale and sell them in your stores, right? Because there was one less thing to work with or to worry about. Now people are wanting to do as much of that as they can on their own because you cut back on the wholesale price on things, right? You don't have to buy it from somebody else who did all the work. Then you save a bunch of money just by paying somebody in your place to do it, I think.
How hard is that to do that in the beginning, though?
It could be tough. I think it could be really tough. But I think once you've seen enough of the products that come through, you know what you want and what you don't want out of a product. And that's a way better start than a lot of people had at the beginning. You remember how we started Open, or you started Open. Yeah. That was crazy. Like, because there was one company out there and every time you put the cartridge on the pen, it would leak all over your whatever you had. So the first thing we had to fix was the leaking. Years later, there was all these other problems. And so just having seen all that stuff makes it easier. But
yeah, when you're the first one doing something, there's a lot of issues that happen. So,
man,
for just to put it out there for everyone, get good at one thing and then expand from there, because you're going to see a bunch of people that do 10 plus products and they don't even have one winner. Just because you have more products doesn't mean you're better. That's not easy to understand, but putting all your efforts into one product that you really believe in is a better idea than 10 products that you just are trying to see what people like.
It sort of goes back to the reason why you don't want to grow 80 strains, right?
Exactly.
Cut that down. Be really good at the ones you do grow. If you are going to introduce a couple new ones, that's fine, right? But be ready to get good at them before you expect them to do as well performance-wise as the other ones.
Well, then it goes back to your very first point of market research. A lot of this you can figure out on market research. You can figure out for yourself. I think it's probably one of the most neglected parts of the cannabis industry. People just think they can come in and, we're just going to sell a bunch of weed. It's a great idea in the beginning, but it's not long-term. Unfortunately, in order to be long-term, you have to think about these ideas far sooner than you used to have to.
That's absolutely correct. Which is why it's hard for new products to catch people's eyes sometimes. But I think that it's also, if they've done the research and they pay attention to how to present the product, then that person's got an advantage with their new product over some other people that might have been around for a while as well.
How many edibles companies are out there right now in Colorado?
I mean, there's got to be hundreds at this point, don't you think? Name brands?
I would imagine.
I don't even know.
Who stands out right now to you?
I think the bigger names are going to be Incredibles.
Yeah, those guys.
Wana is up there.
Yeah.
Coda for chocolates. Also, Incredibles makes chocolates.
Coda makes some good products, yeah.
They do. Those are probably the top three that I can think of offhand. Obviously, I'd like to tout the Comma brand just for a moment because that's what I'll be selling. And I think that we've got...
What makes a good edibles product? Because there's so many.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the things is I think marketing is huge. Whether it's your name is in all the magazines or whatever, like when a customer walks into a store and they look at a wall full of items, usually the number one thing that they do is they ask the bud tender what they recommend. If the marketing is good, the package could stand out on its own, and hopefully the consumer will ask about that specific product rather than asking the bud tender what they would choose first, right? So that's an advantage. Another one is I think the flavors need to be specific and true to what they say. So if it says it's a pina colada gummy, it better taste like a pina colada and not like you took a bite of a coconut. You know what I mean? Because there's a difference.
Yeah.
If it says it's peach, it shouldn't taste like an orange, honestly, or else it's like, what the heck?
It's confusing to the taste buds, for one, because you're going into it expecting something else. And
yeah. Like when you take a drink of water, but it's actually a bottle of vodka. No, not good. Just kidding. No, but I think that's important too. And that's the thing that you can market to the bud tenders when you're selling the product initially. So it's part of the salesman's job to make sure that all the bud tenders are in love with the product that you just sold to the store, so that that bud tender wants to sell the same product to the consumer when they come in. It's so important, right?
Yeah, product knowledge for the bud tender was very big for us when we were growing the stores and we wanted a new product. If you came in and you talked to us as the owners or bud tenders, like, hey, try some of these out. We want to be here for questions, to answer people's questions about them. I mean, these are all things that most sales companies do, but for some reason, cannabis took a while to really take that and run with it.
Agreed. And I think part of the problem was at the beginning, there were so few companies, there was so little competition that each product sort of sold itself, right? Because if you only have 5 to choose from, every store's got room for 5 different products in every vertical. So maybe you have 5 cartridges, you have 5 edibles, and you've got 15 different strains of weed, right? 5 indicas, 5 hybrids, 5 sativas, maybe. That's easy to pair through, right? You can sell that stuff. But as soon as you start encountering hundreds, like we were just saying, and when every company is making a cartridge, which has happened with all the edibles companies, it's a lot harder to stand out. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, I think when we started Open Vape, there were 3, maybe 4 people making cartridges on a small scale. And, there's well over 100 different makers out just in Colorado right now, right?
Yeah. And it's because it's crazy when one thing succeeds and it's a standout, everybody needs to catch up to that, right? And so that's what everybody made their goal, is to make a new cartridge, because they saw. And then what they started doing is picking apart the cartridges that were already on the market and, I'm putting my hands up for quotes right now, but exposing them for what their company wasn't, right? Something that they were lacking or something that the new company was doing better. And that's when people started getting really cutthroat in a lot of those industries or a lot of those verticals.
Do you see flower being still a huge part of the market over the next 5 years?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons is because I consider myself sort of a traditionalist, right? Like, I've gone through all those things. Like, I've done a bunch of edibles, and I still have a cartridge on me most of the time because it's nice and convenient. But it's not my first go-to. Like, if I want to smoke or whatever, if I want to experience myself some cannabis on a Friday afternoon, first thing I want to do is either roll up a J or, put some flower in a pipe. Honestly, that's like the first thing. That's my most favorite feeling of all the different marijuana
What about
products.
the new users?
So I think what the new users are going to do is work their way through all the products just in order to find out that they want to go back to flower again eventually. That being said, though, people that do dabs exclusively are a different market of people completely. So
Dabs are concentrated.
Yeah, it's basically like your hash that you vaporize and you take a much larger hit of a higher concentration of THC at once. You know what I mean? Just so that it hits you harder and quicker. If that's what you want, then that's what you want. But like, there's never been a point, at least recently, where I am craving to do an edible. Like, oh God, I need to have 25 milligrams in me right now. Like, you know what I mean? So I think
there definitely are some heavier users out there.
That's and if you're doing it for pain and things like that, it's a different story too, right? Sometimes I've known people that have really bad backs or knees or something, they just had surgery, who could eat 500 milligrams in a sitting, and a recommended dosage is 10 milligrams. That's 50 times as much as they recommend, right? I eat a quarter of the recommended. So that's 200 times the recommended dosage. That's insane to me.
With
2,000.
With hemp CBD being legal right now, what are you seeing in the ratio market? Because there's a lot of great products out there that are, a lot of 1-to-1 CBD THC, and there's people that are, allowing, like 25% of its CBD. I mean, are you seeing a big push for CBD mixed with THC right now?
I am. Not so much in the flower market because that's sort of hard to do, right? I think the experience is different. But yeah, for edibles and things like that, like when I do an edible, let's just say, like, since I can't handle the full 10 milligrams, a 5 milligram THC, 5 milligram CBD is perfect for me. And it feels like they kind of even each other out. I don't get any sort of the anxiety that I might have back in the day or that kind of thing. And then a lot of people that don't really want to experience a THC high, maybe it's during the day or something, I think have a tendency to go towards things that are like a 10-to-1. Because you can take, let's just say it is a cartridge, you can take a couple of puffs of that, the CBD will help you, but the entourage effect with the THC makes it more effective, right? So the thing as a whole works better for what the CBD is supposed to do if there's that little touch of THC in it. So I do think that there's going to be, I think the ratios can sort of vary because I've seen it 100 to 1 too. There's all kinds of stuff out there, but it's sort of about finding what really specifically works for you. Like if you're doing it for anxiety or pain or whatever. But I don't think that'll ever go away. I think that's also part of the viability of the industry is the fact that CBD is such a major part of the, of the plant itself and the treatments of it all. And like the, the way that people apply cannabis to their lives. Without the CBD, it's not quite the same thing,
Yeah. Do you find that the hemp CBD is competing with the THC market?
A little bit, yeah. Especially for things like topicals and that, right? People aren't looking for full spectrum hand lotions typically. I don't want to put THC on my hands. That seems weird to me. CBD, I'll lather it on all day. So I do think that it'll compete a little bit, but it's such a different market. Like it's such a different end consumer, I'd say.
Well, in hemp, you don't nearly have the rules that are applied to CBD and THC at this point. They're really two separate markets completely, but they are cannabis still. So it's a matter of just understanding because, you guys at your store and at your grow, you're not really focused on CBD. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's not your entire focus, correct? And so the hemp market is exploding here in Colorado. I know prices on isolate, which is the byproduct of it. Well, it's actually the extraction side of the hemp plant. The prices are really dropping right now. Are you familiar with very much of that market? What's happening there?
Not hugely familiar with that side of the market, but I do know that things are changing a little bit. Where before, a while back, you used to be able to add CBD isolate that was derived from hemp to your THC product and then sell that in a regular dispensary. Then they made it illegal to add CBD into a THC product and then sell it in a dispensary. And recently, I believe they just changed it again. You were able to sell pure CBD products in a medical store, but you couldn't sell pure CBD products on the recreational side for some reason. And I believe that's changing as well. So I think that the ability to use hemp-derived CBD in THC products is going to come back, which I think that's huge.
I think a lot of it will depend on the regulation because
Agreed.
There's been different arguments that I've heard on that. And one of them is, how can you expect a product that's not regulated as tough as THC just to be able to add to it? So it kind of negates all the work that you've put in to make THC so regulated, and all of a sudden you can add it in. It works both ways. It's kind of a double-edged sword when you look at it.
For sure. Given
the current state of, I'm going to go into it, as coronavirus, I've been reading some articles on, what's happening and everything's being shut down. There is about to be a significant wave that I think is going to start plaguing our business owners right now. And this is going to happen very quickly. A lot of it's going to happen in packaging only because stuff's getting hung up in customs. Have you seen any of this firsthand yet?
Not that specifically yet, no. But we did have to have some sort of sweeping changes at the facility just at Kind Love, just to try to keep ourselves safe. So even just locally now in a trim room, typically you've got 4 people sitting at a trim table all 2 feet away from each other, listening to music or whatever and chatting, hopefully not too much. But now we had to have a meeting, and it was the craziest thing because in the meeting, the owner came in, he stood in the middle and he talked to everybody. It was great. But we all were like a little freaked out. So everybody in the meeting is standing 6 feet apart from everybody else, right? And that was to introduce the new guidelines, which were you sit at your own table now.
Social distancing.
Yeah, all this new stuff that we're just sort of trying to get used to, this new normal. So no, I haven't really seen it as far as that kind of thing, packaging and stuff wise. But I do think that what's going to happen is people in those closer congregated type areas are going to start getting sick at a quicker pace than people that can sort of isolate themselves, right? And I'm lucky I can work from home doing my sales until I do need to go out and do some deliveries, but I've been pretty vigilant with everything. So I do think you'll see some loss of workers, right? And you won't be able to get as much work done as a company, so that'll affect your bottom line. I do think there's going to be some things happen, but we're still pretty early.
It's really
on.
new right now, for sure. I'm already seeing, as a business owner, I would be freaking out right now because there are so many things that we get out of China that we have nowhere else to get them. I mean, the opportunities I see, though, right now is for people that are in hemp. We have a lot of hemp that's being shipped in from China, too. They grow a ton of it there. Most of the products that have been legal to create in the U.S. have been made from imported hemp oil, lotions and different topicals and stuff like that. So I think there is a huge opportunity that's actually coming our way because we're going to be forced to do a lot of it on our own again. Some people are going to love it, and the consumer may not like it because it's going to cost more. But I think bringing us back to a more of a safety, like it's local, it's grown here. I mean, how many years have we been talking about locally owned and sourced and everything's here? I mean, it's truly going to happen. When we get our cannabis that way, we should be getting our hemp that way too. And with the prices dropping now, I'm hoping that some guys take this and run with it because it's huge.
Yeah, me too. I mean, you're right. What an opportunity. It's crazy to think about.
It could change the way all the hemp farmers are looking at it now. You know, last year at this time, I was concerned for them because there was a lot of them that were going to be jumping into growing. And of course it did. Prices got driven down, but there's still so much imported hemp that will be changing the way we move forward with this lockdown that's happened right now.
Yep, agreed. I guess the good thing is, I mean, the need won't ever go away, right? So as long as we can find some sort of way to keep the cup full, if you will, then that's going to be our advantage, I'd say. Because, like I said, it's never going to go away. Whether you're doing it for medicinal purposes, right, or recreational purposes, if you're using a cannabis product, typically there's some, you're getting something positive out of it. It's doing something good for you, for your life, maybe for your health, whatever it is. And so that is never going to go away, even and maybe even especially in times like these, right? I know that our dispensary, for example, ever since this lockdown, maybe even since last week, right, middle of last week when things started kind of getting pretty real, our store has set some records, especially in the medical side, but definitely on the recreational side as well. So so they've been having a hard time with the grow, making sure that the store's got enough stuff for me to still sell into the marketplace. Some customers that haven't talked to me in months because they tend to only talk to me when they want or when they need something really badly have come out of the woodwork and they're hitting me up. So that's a great thing for me too. But it won't ever kind of go away. And I think that's one of the reasons why they decided they're going to leave grocery stores open. They're going to leave dispensaries open, and they're also leaving liquor stores open, right? Because people need some sort of an outlet.
What else are you going to do? I mean,
you're at home, locked down. Yeah, it's crazy.
You can't. I mean, I had stuff booked this week, and I was calling just to confirm. They're like, we got to close. So it's weird right now. We are in a weird time frame, and not to go too far into that, but I did want to touch on that. Before we go, what do you feel are the top 1 to 2 jobs that are in the industry right now? If you were going to say, hey, you know what, I want to work in this industry, where do I want to put my efforts towards, and what do I want to shoot for?
All right. This is a really good question. I've got to do a lot of things in this business.
What have you done? Let's do that. What jobs have you done in the industry? So
my entry level job was just bud tender, right? I remember walking in for the interview, and I didn't even know what the difference between indica and sativa was that day. I just knew that I had an opportunity to do this job that they called bud tend, and I was like, that's crazy. Never heard that term before. So I walk in, and she asked me if I smoke a lot of weed, and I was like, no, I don't really. She goes, oh. And you could tell there was disappointment in her face, and she sends me behind the counter. She's like, just do what you can. So I walked back there, and the chick I was working with I said, hey, what's the difference between indica and sativa? And she told me. So the next few customers that came in, I just put my best face on and pretended like I knew everything about it. Was able to upsell them into buying a couple more products. So she sent me home. Anyway, gave me the job. I was back the next day. And from that bud tending job, I got so acquainted with sort of the processes of the business and the way that the product worked, the way that people came in to buy it worked, what they needed, what they wanted to hear from us, that kind of thing, that I was offered a management position at another store with the same name downtown. I did that for 2 years. And then after that, I was recruited by the company Open Vape to be one of the very first salesmen that they had. It was an amazing opportunity. I ended up being there for 4 years. Ended up leaving the company as what they would call senior sales manager. So sort of overseeing the Colorado sales team and running my own team of Denver salespeople as well, managing pop-ups and things like that, and events, that kind of stuff. And then I went into the broker game for a little while, basically represented a bunch of different grows and did sales for those grows to dispensaries that needed to purchase, which was kind of nice as well. And then now I am wholesale manager for Kind Love. During the time that I was bud tending and trying to become a manager, I also was required to work at the grow for a while so that I understood the back half of everything. So I've done trimming, any kind of transplanting, basically knew the operation head to toe, like how to work with mother plants, how to do cloning, all that kind of stuff, how to keep the plants healthy. I didn't get into the chemistry side as much, but I still got to call myself a grower for a while. So I've seen a ton of it. So that all being said, I'd say I am not a huge fan of retail in general. I don't really ever want to see myself as a general manager of a retail location of any business again. Although that is a decent job if that's what you're good at and you can manage people.
And you've done other retail besides cannabis too, you're definitely familiar with it.
For sure. I did a lot of stuff in the restaurant business too, so there's just a lot of face-to-face interaction with end consumers, and then managing a team of people is a tough one to do too. But so I'd say probably the top two that I could think of would be lead anything, right? So like if you end up being lead grower, so you kind of get to choose what strains you're going to try out this next cycle or whatever. You get to choose how to fix a problem that you might have had in, you know what I mean, in a certain room, or how to make the product better, how to get your yields higher, that kind of thing. As a lead grower, I think that's really satisfying. It takes a lot of know-how and a lot of sort of wherewithal about what you're capable of, what your team's capable of, and especially what what the location is capable of, like your facility. So I think that's really cool. And then another one I'd say that I never really got a chance to do would be a lead extractor somewhere. So figure out how to take the products that we were talking about earlier, fresh, frozen, trim, and that kind of thing, run them through your cycles and systems, and turn them into the best quality product in order to be sold to the dispensaries to sell to consumers. Like, imagine making the first set of live diamonds.
Yeah.
And naming it diamonds. Like, how cool would that be to put your name on? You know what I mean? It's just cool.
Yeah, there's a few of them out there now, especially that have bounced from Colorado to other places. But what I have noticed is a lot of them have gone into the consulting side too, because I think they enjoy creating those new products and making a creation. They're not doing the growing of the plant, but they're creating a product no matter what.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Conal, it's been great having you today. I thanks for sitting down with us. You know, if people are out there and they're interested and they want to talk more about wholesale or kind of about the market, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Sure. So most of the time, my office is kind of mobile, considering I'm having to do things like deliveries and that in meetings with new people that are going to buy products from us, etc. So typically the best way to get a hold of me would be through my work email, and that's going to be conal@kindlove.com. It's CONAL at kindlove.com. That's typically the easiest way to get a hold of me, and also I won't forget to get back to you because it'll be in my inbox staring me in the face, and I'm like, I got to get back to Mark. Trisha hit me up earlier. So that's probably the best and easiest and quickest way to get a response from me if you have a question.
That's great. So also, if you guys have any questions for me, please reach out to me at plantproblem.com. If you have questions about this podcast or another podcast, please let me know and I will get those answered for you, or I will bring them into an episode and we can discuss it. Also, I'm trying out a call-in number. If you guys feel that more challenging for you to type it in, please feel free to call me at 720-551-8530. Leave your message there, and I'd love to use it in one of the episodes and reply to it and get some information for you. So, Conal, thanks again for being here. It's been great. I look forward to talking to you in the future about the market and what's happening. And thank you guys so much for listening to me. I wouldn't be doing this unless it was for you guys. So I hope I can bring you guys as much solid information as possible. So I look forward to talking to you again. Talk to you guys very soon.
You've just listened to another insightful episode of Plant Problems. If you like what you heard so far, don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues. For additional resources or to leave a review, head over to plantproblem.com. Join us again next week on Plant Problems with Tony Frishknecht. We look forward to having conversations with you as we go along this